So everyone could see the slides, right?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Love to see that. So welcome to the finance section of tonight's town hall. Appreciate everyone being here. Should be exciting, fun. Plus, I'm obviously doing this because I've seen a lot of financial issues in my time as a volunteer. So first off, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Tim Weigel. I'm the Southern Bluegrass Regional Director. Been volunteering for quite some time now. Feels like forever, but I think it was like 10 years. And we also have Nikolai. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight. My name is Nikolai Clark. I'm located in Buffalo. I've been with Alpha Kappa Psi for going over 14 years. First, I did it as a chapter member, and then now the past 10 years as a volunteer. I'm a Eastern Great Lakes Regional Manager of Finance. I've been in the role for about 4 years. And some of my background is I'm an accountant for a local bank here.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and just kick this off fast and furious. So, Nikolai, you want to take this slide?
Sure. I think the PowerPoint, I don't know if you want to flip it to the billing slide.
Oh, you were going to do the billing? Okay. Well, it should be the billing slide right now. You don't see it?
You're showing the treasurer welcome and Carol's email.
Do you see you right now?
Yes.
Because I have the PowerPoint on my share screen.
It's still not coming up.
Hold on one second. Let me check. Technical issues. How about now?
Perfect. All right, that's just showing us the speaker's introduction.
Awesome.
Thank you.
There you go.
So to start off, what we're going to talk about is billing. And I don't know if any of you want to put in the chat of how many of you are new to the treasurer role, or if you're here for just learning as on behalf of another officer. Just put in the chat, and then I'll try to address some of the questions as we go on. But what we have with billing, it is billed twice. For those chapters, just so you're aware, it's due in the fall of October 15th and then in the spring of February 15th. It is normally, a lot of you are saying that you are new to the position. Great. That's very good. So this is a good way to start off the year. And the dues for Heritage Center for each member are $60. And that is based on the chapter spot roster. So we have, from experience from the last 4 years I've been doing this, the biggest issue we run into is chapter spot not being updated with the most current brothers who are active, or if they have graduated or decided to do a leave of absence. And the treasurer position really has to be working in tandem with the membership officer, because the two of you pretty much decide the number of students will be billed and then how much your invoices will show per the member. So that's very important, just making sure that the chapter spot roster is always updated. And then those changes usually you want to make by November 1st and March 1st. And by making those adjustments to your roster before those dates. So initially we'll have the invoice that will go out. And then what happens is the Heritage Center will adjust and give a credit on the bill based on the adjustment of the student members. There's also a $30 membership.
The insurance, right,
Yeah,
Brian?
that's for insurance.
Is that the insurance? Okay, it's written a little differently, but there's also an insurance portion which gets a lot of chapters in trouble. And what happens there is that it's based on your spring membership, which includes your graduates and your initiates. But it's paid in the fall, just the way the contract for the insurance company is written. The best way to figure out that was based on the membership that was provided in the spring. And what that does is it charges $30 per member of that spring semester. And I advise live chapters, so that we'll be going through later in the budget session, to plan ahead for the fall, where you will have enough money for to cover this insurance bill, which live chapters don't, and that's where they tend to get in trouble, because what happens is they end up having 30 graduates or 30 members graduate, and there's not enough money in the reserve for $30 per member to pay for that insurance. So we always advise the chapters to plan ahead and try to figure out how much the insurance will be in the fall for the spring membership. What else can I mention here? So other invoices, so that would be, I'm looking at the right here, the $350 per chapter starting in the fall 2020. So that is the convention savings plan. Every chapter is required to contribute to the convention savers plan, and that is to ensure that you have at least 2 members of the chapter that are able to go to the convention and represent the chapter and be able to vote as a delegate or an alternate delegate, to make sure your chapter voice is really heard and you're able to vote. So that assists the chapter in terms of making sure that you have at least 2 members attend. And then the 2 other standard ones are the pledge fees, which is $48 per pledge. And there is a caveat. There's that $10 day of that you have to report your initiates within the ceremony time. And then the initiate is $84, and that's also reported on your chapter spot. So I don't know if many of you saw, but the chapter spot is laid out where they move through the different stages. And then based on the different stages is, once again, everything's billed by what is in chapter spot. So as they go from initiate, from pledge to initiate to brother, it all kind of moves through that whole process. And then a couple items to note: the best way to pay, I found, is through their online member portal, and there will be links at the end of this presentation. And I think we're also going to be sending this out, right, Tim?
Yes, we'll make sure that it gets sent out to the people that are registered.
Okay, because there's a bunch of helpful links at the end of this presentation. You could also do it by phone, and then the option of actually mailing in a check to the Heritage Center.
Yeah, and there's 2 things I just wanted to point out that I see all the time with different chapters is, first off, make sure you definitely are updating those rosters so you get those credits. There's a lot of chapters that'll get overcharged, well, technically overcharged, but the issue is brothers or pledges drop from the fraternity and then they never make the adjustments, so you're still being billed for them. When if you made the adjustments before November 1st or March 1st, you're not going to get billed for them. And hopefully no one on this call does this, but check to see what you're charging your pledges. If you're charging them $100, but it's $84 and $48, you're running a red already, so you're going to have some financial issues with that. So that's just something to think of mind, because I see that all the time with chapters. All right, so communications to the officers on here. There's certain financial documents to expect to receive. One of them is the chapter statement. This is overall the invoices received and payments made. The invoices are going to show the bills that are being added to the chapter. It's important to keep track of these and keep record of it, because I can tell you from dealing with different stuff, when you might have questions, if you don't have your records straight, it makes it a lot more complicated to figure out what is wrong and where either the misunderstanding is or if there truly is an error, because not everything you see is an error when it comes to the financial stuff. Now, the credit memos, it'll show the credits that are applied to your invoice. Credits are applied related to the invoice. So for example, credits for status changes are applied to dues invoice. So kind of like for like. Otherwise, credits are applied to the oldest and most outstanding balance. So it's going to go to your furthest past due bucket if you have one of those. Payment receipt, that's going to be your proof of payment received. Again, there's times that I've seen chapters state, well, we made a payment. Okay, where's your receipt? You have proof of that payment? No. Well, that's the issue. Is like even in the real world, if you send a payment in for your credit card's not going to assume that you made that payment. They're going to want proof, receipts, email, how did you pay? If you send a check, was it cashed? You know, those important things. Now these documents, they're going to be received by the core 7 officers as well as the chapter advisor. Now it's via email. Very important to make sure that everyone has the proper email in chapter spot. Because if you don't, we could be sending you the emails because that's all we know to look at. That, okay, this is the email they have registered, this is where they want the stuff to go. And if it's not the correct email, we're sending you invoices and you don't know, and next thing you know, you have a large balance. So it's important to make sure that information is up to date. Moving on to the next slide. Nikolai?
Yes. Are there any questions, Brian, we need to address in the chat, or everything we can just continue on?
I've answered a couple of them, but we can clarify them as we go through this if you want.
Okay, it's up to you. I wasn't sure if everyone was looking at the chats or not.
So let me just run through them really quickly because I can answer them. So the question is, why did the convention savings plan increase from $250 last year to $350 this year? That was voted on in August of 2018 by the board of directors. It went from $150 per semester in 2017-18 to $250 this past year, and this year is increasing to $350. That is the plan, and at this time we have not decided if we will bring that back to $250 or keep it at $350. So I'll make sure that we note that and work through that question to answer to everybody. The next question is from Corey. How will fees need to be collected if a spring pledge class will complete their process in the beginning of the fall semester? They will be billed their $84 per person initiation fee. At the time of their initiation, he then had a follow-up question. Will they also have to pay the $60 student member dues question? The answer to that is, at this point, I do not believe so. I don't think that is what the plan is. Here again, it's another question that we don't have the final answer on. And the other question here will be, since there's no in-person convention this year due to COVID, why we need to pay the convention savings plan. The convention savings plan currently is for the August 2021 convention planned in Miami. And that is still scheduled to be held in person. The money that we collect for that convention savings plan is put into an account for the Chapter 2 register and offset registration fees. At this point, the convention's still in process. So if we get to the point where that needs to be canceled many months down the road, we'll figure that out as well. And then the other question is there a possibility that dues owed to the Heritage Center / fraternity would decrease due to our transformation to online chapters? The answer to that is no. The dues are not going to be reduced this year simply because of the technology resources that we are putting into place. There's a new program rolling out this year, and our focus on virtual chapters. So just to clarify, the due structure is $48 per person for pledges, $84 per person for initiates, and $60 per person for student member dues per semester. So back to you guys.
Thank you, Brian. So hopefully that clarified some of the questions for everyone. So we're going to continue on with the budget. So budget is very important. I'm not sure, when I was the treasurer of our chapter many years ago, we had difficulty transitioning our budget from one officer position to the next. And it seems like it happens and prevalent in many chapters in terms of transitioning the finance related or any other officer position related items. And here what's important is you have to keep in mind if you are a school funded organization, or you have to have all of your bank accounts outside of the school. So it depends if you get school funding or not. For school purposes, many chapters have to provide a budget ahead of time. And I find that easier for chapters because they have to lay out all of their funding ahead of time, how much you're going to spend, on what purpose, all of that. If you are a officer of a school that you do not get funding of, so what you want to do is create a budget based on prior year's spending, where you kind of look at how much it costs you, if it's going to cost you same. I know with this COVID-19, it's going to be very different this fall. So some schools are probably going back, some are going to be virtual, but still encourage each chapter to continue as if they were all back in school, and plan their budget ahead of time, because you never know, maybe you're able to do many of the events virtually. So couple things to focus on the budget. There's the inflows and the outflows. So your inflows are the dues that you collect from your memberships, pledges, initiates, your brothers, and some chapters do have some fines and penalties. It really depends on the chapter. And you have fundraising and then grants. So those are the major inflows. There are some schools that also operate businesses, but that's in the bigger chapters where they provide advising services and things like that. With the outflows, the major items you have to first consider are everything that's due to the Heritage Center. So, if your chapter is charging you $200 for your brotherhood, dues, $60 of that you already know is going out for the Heritage Center dues, and then $30 of that going out for the insurance if you're billing them in the fall for the insurance. So you have to consider then all the outflows of covering the overall convention plan, any kind of chapter events, if you have fees that you have to pay for having events, or fees that you incur for example, having a bounced check or insufficient funds in your checking account. And you also want to plan chapter events that go into PBLI, be it in person or virtual. And then you also have to want to start planning ahead, putting away a cushion for the convention savings plan. So items like that you want to consider of the overall amounts that you're going to be bringing in, and then what is going to be like the priority of going out for your chapter to continue be compliant and operating as usual. And then any leftovers is what at the end of the day you want to break even, but any leftovers you either want to save up or do something brotherhood related, an event or end of the semester banquet, end of the year banquet, items like that. You never want to have your outflows higher than your inflows, and that just means you'll have to adjust your budget or your spending, for example, recruitment or rush, or any other items that you might be overspending on. So always try to have your inflows equals outflows. And if you need a budget, definitely reach out to your regional manager of finance. A lot of us have templates that we can provide and walk you through if you don't have one previously passed on to you from another officer. So definitely make a resource of your regional finance managers.
Awesome, thank you. So budgeting next steps. So the year-long budget must be included in next year's chapter 6 spending. Notice the budget should be something you do ahead of time, not after the fact. It's a planning tool, which is always reviewed by the chapter advisor and regional director. You want to keep the chapter informed of the budget. Throughout the time of utilizing the budget, you track all expenses and reconcile the budget. Now understand, you might set aside $500 for food, and then you only spend $350 for it. You want to track that so you have an idea of what you're actually spending on, and it helps you with the next budget. So over under on expenses should be addressed as soon as possible. You know, pay attention to that. Sometimes you might guess it's going to be higher, and it might end up being lower. You could budget a certain amount for rooms for PBLI, and then you find out you have less needs for those rooms because you have less brothers going, or you might need more because you have more brothers attending. Budget variances should be reviewed and explained at the end of the term. So you go through your budget in the fall. At the end of the fall semester, reevaluate that budget to see how it's looking going into the spring. It's basically a living, working item for the chapter. And keep your officers accountable. That's probably the biggest thing. You don't want officers to overspend. This isn't their personal checking account. This is the chapter's account, the chapter's money. You have to be responsible with it, or else you could end up with a chapter in financial situations by not paying attention to that. So, you know, if you set aside a budget for the president has something to do with awards, and you set aside 500 and they arbitrarily spend 1,000, that's not good. They need to not spend more than that, or if they do, they need to bring it to the brotherhood to discuss it. So, all right, fundraising tips, Nikolai.
Thank you. So hopefully if you do have questions as we are presenting some of these slides, just keep posting them in chat, and Brian will help us out. And then we could also have some time at the end of this to go over any specific questions for chapter related if you like. So regarding fundraising, it's probably going to be challenging this semester round with, as we mentioned before, COVID-19. But we have seen some chapters do great and successful virtual events already, where they put on fundraising events or they put on community volunteering events. So here you have to remember that with the fundraising event, couple items, you could read through all of the different squares, but couple of them you want to point out is that you don't want to do it's like the third top one. You want to do money up front. That should be avoided because then it creates liability on the chapter to make sure that the service is provided. You always want to provide whatever the fundraising activity or the event is, and then be able to collect your portion of that fundraising activity. The other portion of fundraising is, I think, a lot of chapters miss, and that is making sure that the fundraising event should not only be a fundraising event. I'm going the square right below it, but it should also be a publicity event to bring brand awareness to your chapter, to bring brand awareness to Alpha Kappa Psi, and the event will help you through the years, especially if it's one that's repeatable, to be able to grow the event bigger, better, more successful, and then at the end of the day, by putting your chapter out there with AK Psi, you're able to bring in more money as fundraisers. And here, live chapters can start small, local, and then you know, there's chapters that have only 10 members, and they may able to solicit their small, local, main streets vendors or main streets, eateries and coffee shops to say 10% of sales on this day. We could be a fundraiser, you know, a portion of that goes for example, the Alzheimer's Walk, and then a portion of that could be an AKSI fundraiser. And then for bigger chapters that are, you know, pushing 300 members, they have bigger fundraising events. They have bigger alumni connections, and with those, they usually bring in speakers that they can use as fundraising. And I don't know, Tim, are there any other examples you could think of for fundraising events? I think that pretty much the overall goal is to make sure that the chapter is able to put their name out there, put their organization, and then in the process come up with a sustainable, repeatable event year after year that grows.
I mean, there's definitely some options to go out there. I'm sure it mentioned how bake sales and stuff like that, that's simple. Really just know your campus and what they like. Like you might have a campus where you have a lot of students or people in the area that like to golf. You could do a golf tournament. When you're doing big events like that, it's also not a bad idea. Why don't you partner with a local charity, and then whatever money's raised, maybe half of the funds goes towards that charity, while the other proceeds will stay in your organization. That's a good way to possibly split it, make it a philanthropy event. You also add a little assistance from them in running the golf tournament, so it takes pressure off of you, so that you would be able to handle them. It's really just knowing the campus. Another good one, at least if you're near a NASCAR racetrack, because I know like at my home chapter of UCF, we used to partner with the company that caters all the NASCAR events for VIP tents. And they would pay us $8.50 per hour per person. And in that one event, we'd make $6 or $7 grand at like the Daytona 500. So, and even a couple of the students got internships from it. So there's definitely some big events out there. Just really looking around, talk to your campus stadiums and the arenas when they're allowed to have basketball games or whatever the plan is for that, because they might allow you to do vending there. So all possibly good events to keep an eye on. Now, I do know we have a few things that have come up in the chat that we want to kind of crowdsource a little bit. So one of the questions in here, how do we as officers handle situations where brothers owe a lot of money in dues but are about to graduate? So anyone out there have any suggestions or ideas on that? Don't be all shy.
Hey guys, it's Corey. So I know for us, one of the things we do is one of the incentives of graduating in the good standing with the chapters is you get your stole and you get a cord. So I don't know if you guys do an incentive like for that brother graduating, but obviously, you know, we just kind of had that conversation saying, hey, this is where your balance is. If you don't pay it, you don't get your cord or your stole. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we do like a certificate too. It's a whole shebang. So basically, you know, just letting them know like they lose the incentive as a result of an outstanding balance. And then in the event, because, you know, of course, everybody doesn't really fall for the incentive. Some people are just like, it's fine, whatever. And then from there, we just sort of regroup and like figure out how much was that one brother like really putting a dent in the chapter at large, if that makes sense.
Okay, that's definitely good. Nice little positive reinforcement there. Anyone else have any ideas how to address that?
So I go to the University of Tennessee, and we have a chapter of around 115 to like 140, just depends. And we have a graduation ceremony, and then we also do the stoles like Corey was talking about. And if I'm not mistaken, I think if they don't pay their dues by graduation ceremony, they cannot speak because they're given the option if they want to give a graduation speech. And then they also do not receive their stoles, like Corey said.
Okay. Now, one thing just to point out, which positive reinforcement, stuff like that's good, but so you're coming up to graduation and the brother hasn't paid yet. Could that be possibly our fault, maybe for not following up with them throughout the semester? Like, is there something?
Yes.
Yes, Brian, you're correct. The answer is yes. But, you know, because a lot of times it's like, okay, you start the semester out, you let everyone know what their dues are, and then you forget about it. And the next thing you know, we're at Thanksgiving, and it's like, oh, wow, we have 10 brothers that haven't paid. So some of that ownership is not being proactive in your position. And it's important to kind of stay on top of it, because in certain scenarios, you might find a brother, they can't pay the $200 around Thanksgiving, but would they have been able to have been put on a payment plan within the chapter earlier on? Or could there have been another issue that you could have actually helped them? So just some things to think about. But positive reinforcement is good, but stay proactive.
Yeah, I sorry, I'm going to butt in here. I did put in the chat earlier that one of the key pieces of the treasurer position is communicate to the chapter. You should be reporting out in each chapter meeting what the financial standing situation of the chapter is. You should be communicating with your chapter advisor, your regional volunteers, and when you get to the point of having questions that either can't be answered or a difficult financial situation, reach out to your chapter educational resource coordinator on the fraternity staff at the Heritage Center. You know, we've got a plethora of resources to provide. We counsel, coach, work through situations. Tim and Nikolai said earlier, we're not in the business of closing chapters, because if you think about the business model, the more chapters we close, I mean, the less revenue there is to support the entire organization. The other thing with the community that Steve Hartman walked through earlier in the chapter treasurer collaboration group is pose questions in there. The most times the things that the chapters are facing are not new, and you've got 210 other treasurers across the organization, chapter treasurers, that are dealing with situations exactly like you are, and pose a question out there. Work through the curriculum, the officer curriculum roadmaps in the My Journey section of my AKSI, and then but just communicate with everybody. Over communicate is better. And then if you get to a situation that you have those questions, just ask. Don't ever be afraid to pick up the phone and send an email and ask the question. And Corey asked a good question in terms of in the chat, coming from a small chapter, and finances are definitely an uphill battle. How do you work through and look at cutting expenses and in terms of that, and go through that budget. What are you spending money on? What is are you coming into the year within your reserve? Are there school resources that you can tap into that a lot of universities will give money to each student organization based on your student activity fees. Here again, every university, every chapter is a little bit different. So just look at the options out there and work through how you can survive. The coming year is certainly a year of survival for each chapter, for all of us. It's a year of question and not a lot of answers. And this is one of those years that we're trying to get away from the punishment, quote unquote standards and the stick, the punishment stick and dangling the carrot and whatever, and adding value to each chapter. And going virtual, you're going to be, your members, your students on your campus are going to be looking for community, and we have that to offer. So just a few little tips.
Yeah, and the one thing just to add on to what Brian was just saying, ask, especially if you might not have issues that you want to do with your chapter, but financially you're trying to cut the corner, so to speak, or reduce your budget on expenses. A good example of that is when we went virtual, not every chapter was able to be provided Zoom from their schools, but if you asked us, we would make sure you would get access to the fraternity's Zoom to be able to hold meetings and do what you needed. So just ask and see what resources we might have available to you as well, Corey. All right, so going on to the next slide. Accounting controls. So best practices, have no more than $25 cash on hand. Bottom line is we're not in the business of being a profit organization. You're not for profit. So you shouldn't have all this excess cash available to the chapter. You should have basically your reserves or enough to handle what you need to for upcoming expenses, but it shouldn't be like loads and loads of money for the chapters. Keep subledgers for members and their accounts. Be organized. If your chapter is not organized on the financial side of it, it's very easy to struggle as a chapter because literally everything for a chapter success really revolves around the financial statutes. I've seen chapters stress and struggle because they owe a lot of money. Separate the financial duties. You want multiple officers approving things. It shouldn't be Jill, the treasurer, approves everything. No, there should be a checks and balances. That's why typically you have the president and the treasurer on the account. So, because you need to follow up and support, and they make sure you're doing your job and vice versa. And Brian probably loves this one. Do not use personal accounts. I'll repeat that. Do not use personal accounts. There's this thing out there. It's called embezzlement. It's real. You probably believe that none of your brothers would ever take money out of the chapter. Well, one, it's happened. Two, don't use personal accounts to tempt them. They suddenly get a $10,000 deposited around dues. It's tough to say, oh, I'll pay it back, and then you never pay it back. Make sure you follow the debit card best practices worksheet. Personally, I'm not a big fan of debit cards for the chapters, but if you are using the best practices and it's cautious and safe, then it's not bad. Record transactions immediately. You don't want them piling up on you because then it's just tough to keep up with. Retain records 3 to 6 years. Honestly, most businesses have to retain their records for 7 years, so it's really a good practice just to get into. Venmo. I'm going to assume everyone on here does not use Venmo for chapters. If you do, I highly say stop now. FYI with Venmo, you can't really have a chapter Venmo account anyway, and it's going to deposit into personal accounts. So it's not a good thing to have money go into Venmo for collections. And keep chapter advisor on the bank account. It helps with ease of transfer. I've seen chapters struggle because they have to find who was on the bank account from people they don't know from 5 years ago. Not a good thing. Now, chapter audit. Should be conducting one. It is required. So create a committee of 4 to 5 members, preferably with accounting experience, and include other outside the chapter if need be, so that you can have a good audit to make sure everything is the up and up. It reviews the financial records. It's a good checks and balances. Make sure you have the proper receipts. Businesses get audited all the time, so it's a good thing to get in the practice of. You check for discrepancies or fraud. Yes, fraud. Determine chapter's financial standings. And of course, ask professionals or alumnus to help conduct yearly audits. So a good time to do the audit is really between one VP of finance leaving and another one coming on. That way you can check the previous work so that you don't blame it on the one coming in if there was a discrepancy that you find out later on. So very important on that one.
And I just want to jump in for a second, Tim, with chapter audits. So there's also in the fall, you pay, I believe, a $30 surety bond. And what something you want to keep in mind is that as a treasurer, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but as a treasurer, you are personally liable for running the chapter finances. So, and that's another reason why you want to do also an audit before you start your position, because what happens is if there is a discrepancy and it wasn't caught during the audit, it could be put on you as the responsible party for any of the financial mishandling of the chapter's funds. Is that, so the chapter pays a $30, I believe, surety bond to be able to help the chapter then go after and recover any funds. Is that correct, Brian? Or
Yeah, the surety bond is it's insurance. It's a crime policy that covers all of our chapters and all of our chapters. Believe me, I've had more than my share of experience, particularly this past year with dealing with chapters that have had money misappropriated. And actually, we just got a check this week for an insurance claim that was filed. Now, mind you, there is a $1,000 deductible. So if let's say the chapter files a claim because $10,000 is missing, if we can, prove those numbers and work with the insurance company, the chapter would get a check for $9,000. So you're missing $1,000 out of that insurance claim. And I will say, the embezzlement claims that we have dealt with, the insurance company always goes after that individual to pay that claim back, meaning, their future earnings, their parents, whatnot. So it is very important that the chapters, and not necessarily for you, but to make sure that you're checking and auditing the books, making sure that you're not collecting cash. If you are collecting cash, to give receipts and getting that cash in the bank as soon as you can, because the one thing the insurance policy does not cover is cash, because cash is not traceable. So we've had claims where a chapter treasurer went home for a meeting and had $1,000 in cash, and suddenly a roommate took it. We can't prove who did it, and the chapter is out $1,000. So just make sure that you are putting the proper controls in place, working through a review and audit of your financials every year to make sure every transaction is valid. It's always an unfortunate situation, but it is true. And Corey made a big, in all caps, embezzlement is real. And Corey, your name sounds familiar to me, but I can't remember what chapter you're with, so I hope it hasn't happened in your chapter, but it may.
It definitely has. I'm Ada Omicron at East Carolina.
Yeah. And in one of my volunteer roles, just to give you an idea of embezzlement, I did have a chapter that did embezzle, and we ended up finding it was $17,000. So it could be quite expensive. All right, next slide.
And I think we're here getting pretty much towards the end, as I mentioned. So we'll probably send this slide out or this presentation out to everyone who attended. But you have to keep in mind a couple of the resources. We have the Member Service Payment Center, and that if you log into aksi.org, it should be as a tab on top left, on top right of the screen in the members section. And you're able to, the only thing with that is when you are transmitting money through the Member Service Payment Center, in the notes, just write some kind of reference on what the money is going for. It helps really the accounting staff at Heritage Center to be able to apply that money to the correct invoice, or if it was, for example, going towards your pledge fees instead of an invoice you already still waiting to pay. So just put some kind of note in there. And there's a couple of budget templates. Is that out there, Tim, right? They have access in the training manuals.
Yeah, there should be some budget templates there for them that they can look at. And again,
Okay.
like you mentioned earlier, I know different regional managers of finance have their own type of budget template too. There's no real right one. It's just the most important part is to use one.
Mm-hmm. Right, so you're able to see the chapter's money coming in and going out and plan ahead. And then there's 2 links in there for the operations avenues. One is for the finance specific episodes, and those go over, I believe, more in detail on just looking through what an invoice is, looking with what a credit is. So it shows actual samples. Here we simplified our presentation down to the most important parts, but there's more detailed presentations out there on aksci.org. And then I think the other one that I would recommend is going through the officer, which is the last one, the officer development YouTube playlist. That kind of summarizes how the treasurer position interacts with all the other officers, and vice versa, how the whole chapter, the entire leadership team should be together, because at the end of the day, the finances for the chapter, even though they're run by you as the treasurer, any action from another chapter member or chapter officer may or will impact you. So just making sure that communication is constantly there. You know where money is going, where it's being spent, and you're always in the know, and vice versa. You're always letting your officers, chapter officers, know if you're paying a bill, if you have an invoice, things like that, just so everyone is aware of where the money is coming and going.
All right, that's it for the slides. Is there any questions in the chat, Brian?
Yeah, there's one chat. Will we have access to the links later? Yes, they're gonna post on YouTube the recordings of these sessions, as well as if the PowerPoints. I believe we'll get them out to all the attendees, and we can put them in the knowledge base. And then I had another question around having a lot of international students, and they will not be able to attend. Their student members may not be able to attend with virtual programming if they don't come back to either the campus or the states. So in those situations, look at potential leave of absence for those members to excuse them from dues payments as well as attendance payments. Our goal for those students that can't come back or be engaged is to keep them engaged to some extent, as well as when let's just say that yes, we are at some point going to get back to normal, to get them to come back active and participate in the chapter. So for this year, this fall semester, put them in LOA, which keeps them in good standing, does excuse them from dues, and then that also reduces the per person, the quantity of dues that the fraternity is charging the chapter. So here again, going back to communicating with your advisor, regional director, resource coordinator, the Heritage Center staff, we understand with 210, 212 chapters, there's going to be some situations that a blanket policy, a blanket decision does not make sense for everybody. So flexibility is the key. I think we've all learned that this past year. I've been very impressed with our student members in terms of the flexibility and the like taking the bull by the horns, saying we're going to do this, or we're at least going to try. So here again, you've got a lot of people in this room on the main room when we started tonight. There's another town hall in August. By that time, I hope that we have more answers in as an organization, but also in our world in terms of what's going on with COVID, what our campuses are doing. So please come back to that. That one will also be recorded. You can either attend the treasurer session or the main chapter operations session. So just communicate. It's like in real estate, and Tim will agree with this. Location. I say communicate. So.
All right. So before we wrap up, does anyone out there have a question they would like to ask us?
Well, this is Vadim. I'd like to make a few comments, and I'd like to ask a few questions as well. So I'm the regional manager of finance for the Atlantic Metro region. It was a newly created position this year. So I've kind of stepped into this role kind of in a time where obviously the virus started up, and a lot of the chapters in the region were going through their election processes. So not only was I new to the role, a lot of the people who are on this conversation today that are from my region were new to their position. So it was a challenging experience for me. So first thing, I want to thank Nikolai for giving me some assistance when I started out, when I reached out for some templates and some conversation about how to do certain parts of the role. He's obviously very experienced in that role, and he was a great help to me. And I'd like to, I guess, solidify on some of the statements that were made earlier today, establishing good habits. So if you're in your role and you establish good habits, whatever those habits happen to be, you're going to be in a much better place. So whether it's communication, as what Brian stated, whether it's budgeting that was mentioned and talked about throughout this presentation. Obviously, budget is very, very important. I've gone through a review of a bunch of budgets that were submitted by various chapters in the region as part of their success plan. Some were obviously good or better than others. So for those people that have had budgets that obviously will, those reviews will come back to you. I urge you to spend a little more time on improving your budgets where they're necessary. So templates have been mentioned here. Nikolai has a very nice template for his own region that he showed me that I would definitely say it's a good thing to have more detail as opposed to less detail. The more detail you have in your budgeting, the easier it's going to be for you to manage your chapter's finances over time. The other thing that was mentioned is obviously documentation. Now, documentation comes in various forms. So one thing you might want to do is document the process of how you are or supposed to be as a finance manager or treasurer of your chapter. What you might want to do is look at how to transition your role into the next person. There was a few tips mentioned as far as putting in a chapter advisor on there, but whatever the process you happen to come up with, whatever you can write up that will make it easier for people to transition into the role, that would certainly help. You want to leave the position in a better state that you found it in. So that's kind of an overall statement that I'm making, not specific to any one thing. I know that when the virus hit and I was introducing myself to the various treasurers, one of the things that I suggested is they reach out to the bank and check with their policies to see how many of them would be willing to allow you to change or transition the names on the account without actually making an appearance at the branch. Obviously, various banks have different policies. Not sure how many people have actually reached out to do what I suggested, but I think it's a worthwhile thing to find out what the banks can do to expedite the process or make the process easier to transition. And after all that, I wanted to ask one question. So with the Venmo statement, given that everybody has gone through a kind of an interesting transition to a virtual environment where you can't necessarily physically be on campus to collect funds as far as checks or cash, what can be used to, if not Venmo, to make the process easier and electronic?
And Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but you should be able to pay through ChapterSpot because they have it set up that way. You just got to make sure that on Stripes on the back end, it has the right checking account set up to it so that you're not misplacing where the money's going and it gets deposited correctly. Brian, anything else?
Yeah, no, yes. The chapters can set up and pay and accept individual payments via either credit card, I believe, as well as online check through ChapterSpot. It is set up to through a Stripe account to their bank account. If the chapters need help to set that up, we can work with ChapterSpot to get those set up. Additionally, over the number of years that we have preached, we do not want individual payments from chapters for their dues from your members. In a unique situation like this, absolutely 100%. If somebody wants to come on to the AKSI website to pay their individual dues for the chapter, and then the chapter can write that down on their balance for that individual person, they can do that as well. Here again, a unique situation. I hate to say you can use Venmo, but let us do some research on that, simply because of the way the world is right now.
So I guess the question I would have is, can you come up with a little bit of documentation pertaining to Chapter Spot that can be easily disseminated to say that here's where you are, here's where you want to be, and here are the steps to get from A to B? That would greatly.
Yeah, in fact, I'm almost positive that when we set up or when we partnered with Chapter Spot about 5 years ago, that information exists. I will confirm that it is still correct and get it out, and we'll get it out to everybody.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Now, the one thing I do want to point out, if they pay through Chapter Spot, you have to link your account to Stripe, and it's all through a third-party system. And if you change your bank account, but you never change it on the Stripe account, all the money's going to go back into that old account. And I'm speaking from experience. I've had a chapter have $7,000 in an old account, and they didn't even know that account existed because the people that had it set up were long gone, and they had a new account since then. And it took like 1.5 years, 2 years to figure it out, and having to call Stripe and then find the right person to go with them because they weren't on the account. So if you do it, whenever you're changing accounts, they need to be careful of doing that. I mean, I don't know why they would change it that often, but it's happening.
Well, it happens. I know Sydney has raised her hand, but I do want to. I'm gonna call Marvin out because you've said our bank won't budge, and I want to ask you. They won't budge on changing the signers, or what is that referring to?
Oh, so we have to appear in person in order to transfer the account from the last officer to me. They won't let us do it virtually.
Okay. Understood.
I may be able to help a little bit with that. Sometimes it depends on what bank it is. Obviously banks have gotten much more strict and with more regulations, which Vadim can attest to over the last several years. But sometimes they'll take a letter or a phone call with, from us to help get that process through. So if you want to let me know if we can help you in any way, let us know with that.
Yeah, I'll definitely send an email. Thank you.
All right. And Sydney, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so I kind of have 3 things now. Kind of to touch on what Marvin just said. I know that our bank, you can do the drive-through window, so you can maintain social distancing and everything, and so you won't be exposed. So that might be an option if you're close. Then on Venmo, our chapter got really, really lucky. We set up a Venmo before they took away groups. So I'm the account manager, and then my position is split up between 2 people. So I'm the vice president of accounts payable, and then there's a vice president of accounts receivable. So we're both on that. And so it goes directly from the chapter's Venmo to our bank account. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then, what was the other thing?
I just want to get a clarification on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
I think the new bank regulations, I don't think they allowed Venmo for organizations. I think that was the issue that chapters were running into, is that Venmo is an individual. It's a person to person, and it's not a business to a person or a business to a business kind of platform. So I would just verify whose actually credentials are on the account, and if you're using your TIN number or if you're using somebody's social security number, in which case it's a personal Venmo account.
So on ours, it's just linked to my email and the other vice president's email. So it's not we're attached to it, but we can see it. We can control the money in there. But it's almost like a second bank account that they can put money into for fundraising. And that's also kind of where I was going with my third point. So what we've seen is pledges. They aren't put into Chapter Spot to where they can pay on Chapter Spot. So a lot of the time they pay through Venmo, since it's the chapter's Venmo. Have y'all run into the same problem where pledges can't pay on Chapter Spot?
Chapter Spot, when the officers, okay, I know what you're talking about. And yes, because when the pledges are entered now, because previously all the members had access to Chapter Spot and now they no longer do. I know that I've asked this question to our chapter spot representative, so let me get an answer on that, because I believe that the way it works, that the chapter can still invoice all those people and send them a link to pay through. But let me get the exact information and answer to you on that for all of you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we end? No? Then we're good. Well, I would like to thank everyone for joining us on this lovely Wednesday night. I'm sure there's plenty of places you could be, but where else to hear us talk about financial stuff with the attorney? It's the best thing you can do on a Wednesday night. So thank you all. We appreciate you, and have yourself a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
We hope to see you back in a few weeks
Thank
for
you.
the next one.
Thank
It'll
you.
be great. I'll be
All
there.
right. Thank you.
Bye.